as global leaders gather in Davos, the World Economic Forum has released a stark warning in its annual Global Risks Report. The survey of over 1,300 experts identifies geopolitical tensions as the most severe risk facing the world over the next 2 years, with economic volatility seeing the sharpest rise in concern. This backdrop of uncertainty frames the forum's discussions, where nations are actively pitching for investment. Meanwhile, Nigeria launched its first sovereign pavilion at the event, with Vice President Shettima showcasing the country's economic reforms and growth of nearly 4% in 2025. He emphasized that Nigeria is open for business and collaboration.
The message of this House is simple and deliberate. We are replicating on the global stage what His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has delivered at home in repositioning Nigeria's economy. We are here to engage the world from a position of strength as one of the world's largest emerging markets. Nigeria is a nation of over 242 million people today, with a median age of about 17 years. And the trajectory of global growth is facing Africa. And certainly, most certainly, Nigeria will make or mar that transition.
Well, Arise News correspondent Anyeze Osakwe is covering the World Economic Forum and now joins us for updates and more analyses. Anyeze, thank you so much for joining us here on Newsday. Anyeze, please confirm that you can hear me.
Of course, Cynthia. It's really good to be with you again today.
Of course, you look a lot warmer compared to what was the case yesterday.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. In you hearing me.
Yes, I am, definitely.
Of course. So let's talk about the Vice President's speech. We heard him talking about Nigeria being open for business with the Nigeria House and everything. Just tell us how that was received by those in attendance.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because I was also there at the Nigeria House yesterday on the Davos promenade when the Vice President, after the Minister of Trade kind of gave her introduction speech, the Vice President, Shettima, showed up to a pretty large crowd, and we were all sort of gathered around outside when he officially cut that ribbon to inaugurate the first ever Nigeria House here in Davos. And much like what we heard from that soundbite that you played in the introduction, like he said, Nigeria is open for business, and this is something that we've heard reiterated from different members of the administration, different members of the Nigerian delegation here as well. And after he spoke, I actually had a chance to ask him, a couple of questions about what message Nigeria is sending by us being so present at all of these international summits, international meetings. The president just came back from the United Arab Emirates for Sustainability Week, and now we have this sizable delegation here in Switzerland. And again, he reiterated that message that Nigeria has a lot of opportunities, and what they want to do is really to showcase what's possible from Nigeria today and, opportunities for the future as well. I also think the Minister of Trade, Jumoke Oduwole, she had a really interesting line where she says, you can't clap with one hand. And that really stood out to me because I think it really puts into focus how much this administration wants to emphasize international cooperation to move the country forward and move towards more development. It's by working with others and showing others what Nigeria is capable of. So that was really the highlight of yesterday's events.
Absolutely, Anyeze. And of course, regarding today, we know that there's a lot of anticipation regarding President Emmanuel Macron's arrival, and he's supposed to arrive today and leave today so that he doesn't even meet Trump. Can you tell us what's going on? Any talk about what role he's supposed to play at WEF this year?
Sure. I mean, I think that a lot of the focus for countries that are coming today is just, unfortunately, they have to be somewhat reactionary to what President Trump, the U.S. president, is doing. I mean, countries now are going to have to play offensive, European countries especially, because of all of the havoc, I would say, that Donald Trump has essentially brought to the international community and what were thought to be allies. So I think that France is coming, and it'll be interesting to hear what Macron says. France is coming with a position of, they're trying to establish themselves as an individual, but also rely on France's allies, aside from the U.S., as Europe increasingly tries to carve its own path that maybe isn't so dependent on what the U.S. is doing. And it's a significant divergence from the past, but it almost feels like that's the new normal that everyone is just going to have to adjust to, whether they like it or not. So I think, Macron, like you mentioned, Macron's speech will definitely be one to watch. And then, of course, all of the anticipation about what President Trump is going to say on Wednesday when he arrives as well. So a lot of, as Nigeria is sort of carving its own path, we have the rest of the international community as well, just trying to figure out how to relate with one another. So that will definitely be one to watch.
The theme for this year is dialogue. On the sidelines, what are those conversations that you might have been privy to or that you heard about that might put Nigeria more on the map beyond what the president and the delegation aim to achieve this year?
Yes, so I was just, running here from an interview that I just did with Wale Tinubu, who's the CEO of Owando, and he just had a morning fireside chat at the Nigeria House. And I was able to sort of pull him aside for a brief interview that will hopefully play later today. But he had a few interesting points. One was that reiteration of the fact that Nigeria is here for business and that Nigeria is open for business. I also asked him about how Nigeria is planning to balance insecurity in the country and a sense of instability with welcoming investors and business into the country. And, he basically said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, that isn't really an issue, that it's a very small percentage of the country, in his words, that are actually dealing with those sorts of challenges, and that shouldn't impede potentials for the future, business potentials, investment potentials. So he doesn't necessarily see that as an issue. And then finally, one really interesting point that I think he made was the fact that he said that in 20 years, he believes that cars we'll have more electric vehicles in Nigeria than regular cars, which is a pretty short timeline if you think about it. And I thought that that's an interesting point that he made, because so much of Davos is about, future technologies, artificial intelligence, and this conversation around electric vehicles hasn't really been one that we've had in earnest in Nigeria. I know that we have a couple of Nigerian homegrown countries that are creating and manufacturing electric vehicles, but the fact that he said that in just 20 years, he believes that we'll have more than 50% of Nigerian cars being electric vehicles. I think that's an interesting thread, and people should read into that what they will.
It's quite it's subtly alarming to hear that the issue of insecurity, which you brought up to him, was played down, and he attributed it to just a portion of the country. That's quite unsettling. Even regarding the cars as well, a lot of people will say that we need to see more done with the roads and the likes. But I know that you touched on climate and energy yesterday. I'm wondering, from the conversations that you've been privy to, developing nations want climate finance from wealthy countries. Are there any specific commitments that you're seeing coming up so far? Do you think any of that will happen in any time soon?
I think there's still a lot that we have to see done when it comes to conversations around climate change at this year's World Economic Forum. Like I mentioned yesterday, it really doesn't seem to be top of mind for anyone, whether it's developing countries or developed countries. I think that, we still have a couple of days, and I'll definitely keep my eyes peeled, because, I'm glad you're bringing it up, climate change just isn't discussed as much as it should be. In 2025, there was an actual media report around that. So I think that we'll we'll have to see when it comes to firm commitments. But as of now, no, we have not seen any for developing countries, but we'll keep our eyes peeled.
All right, Annie. Usually, the World Economic Forum gets a lot of, criticism as being a gathering for talk, a lot of talk and more talk. Does anything stand out this year that will make it, that is convincing to you that this will not just be another talk shop, but would actually lead to implementation that we can feel, see, and measure before the next World Economic Forum for 2027?
I think that's a really good question, and it's hard to say as of now, but what I will say is that it feels like the global alliances have fundamentally shifted ever since President Trump came into office the first time around, and even more so now. He has essentially doubled down and reacted to or acted in ways that he said he would, and everyone is sort of having to fall in line or carve their own path that doesn't necessarily include the United States. And I think that in itself is uncharted territory. So the fact that President Trump is a president of action, and whether you like it or not, that so much of this forum is revolving around him, what he says and what he does, it's what has to happen when you're dealing with the United States. So I think that in terms of any firm commitments that we may see, or any kinds of actions as well from other countries, we'll just kind of have to see what that means in the broader context of what the U.S. is doing. And that's just a fact, whether we like it or not.
Very well put. Arise News correspondent Anieze Osakwe, many thanks for joining us here on Newsday. We appreciate your time and insight as always. Thank you.